welcome to this Scotch talk on direct response fundraising. My name is Jeremy Beer. I am the co-founder and CEO at Amphil, and I'm happy to be taking a little bit of time here today in this very casual environment and format, what we call Scotch Talks, to talk a little bit about direct response and a number of its facets, whys, the hows, and so forth. These Scotch Talks are intended to be very casual. Like the idea is you have a glass of Scotch in your hand. Today I have a glass of tequila in my hand. It's just turned noon where I am in Arizona, so it's not quite my usual thing, but the Scotch Talk is a good excuse to do some day drinking. And hopefully it's a good excuse for you to do a little bit of day drinking. I feel like these used to start later in the day, even on my time, like 1 or 2. Now it's noon, and it'll be like 9 a.m. before too long, and then we'll have a real problem. Let me introduce our guests, and then we'll get going here. Teresa Beagle is a senior consultant with us here at Amphil. She has 15 years of experience in the field of nonprofit, the nonprofit sector generally. Was with the Catholic Diocese of Phoenix before coming over to Amphil, and a graduate of Franciscan University in Steubenville, and lives here in Phoenix, as I do. And also, like me, is a very big baseball fan. Welcome, Teresa.
Thanks, Jeremy. Glad to be here.
And then Mark Diggs, another of my colleagues here at Amphil and one of our managing consultants in direct response, has been in the field of philanthropy, nonprofit management, fundraising, and consulting for nearly 3 decades, which that really dates you, Mark. But
I know. I'm still trying to keep it young, trying to stay young.
We won't linger on that for too long.
I hang around younger people. That's how I do it.
Mark has a degree from the Wheaton Conservatory of Music in Wheaton, Illinois, and lives in beautiful, lovely Greenville, South Carolina. Welcome.
Amen.
So we are going to have a conversation here that you are part of. So please ask us questions as we go along or any time. You can use the Q&A function here in Zoom, or you can just put your question in the chat. I mean, it's a little bit harder for me to monitor the chat because it kind of gets lost sometimes, but so do whatever you wish. But the Q&A is a better way to make sure your question gets seen, and I will do everything I can to get to it. Otherwise, we'll just talk amongst ourselves. I would love, though, to know if you're in here right now and not watching this as it's being recorded later on, who you're with, what organization you represent, maybe where you are today. Hopefully it's a little bit cooler than it. What does it say here in Phoenix, Teresa? 117, something like that, 116?
I think that's where we were headed, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a tiny bit on the warm side. So if you have something better to tell us, please do.
Vacation recommendations.
Yeah, where should we be right now, Teresa and I, other than in here in Phoenix? So, all right, well, the throat clearing is done. This Scotch Talk is about direct response, by which we mean direct mail, but not just direct mail, also other means by which to raise money directly from givers in a kind of at a large scale way. So email, digital advertising, social media are all going to be part of this conversation today. We're going to talk about how to improve your direct response strategy and program. Okay, let's set a baseline here. Teresa, I'm going to start with you. By the way, Teresa and Mark, they submit questions that I should ask them, and then what happens is then I don't ask them those questions. I think it's the first Scotch Talk you guys have done with me, so you didn't know that this is how I did it, but this is how I do it. So if they don't know the answer, they're probably going to say, I don't know, and that's okay. But back to the question, Teresa, what are we talking about with direct response? I guess I kind of went over it a little bit, but maybe elaborate. Like, what does it include? Are we talking just current donors? Are we talking prospective donors as well? What all is included here?
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Jeremy, that we're not just talking about things you put in the mail, but it's all the communication components that send out a message to your donors asking them for some sort of immediate response. So mail's a big one, social media, email, even texting, voicemails. There's a lot that goes into that. And that's communication with any donors, whether it's donors that are currently in your file, maybe donors that it's been a while, LIBUNs or SIBUNs.
Hold on.
I'm throwing out big terms.
What's a LIBUN?
So that means a donor who gave to you last year but hasn't yet this year, and SIBUNs is they've given at some point but not this year. So donors that are kind of close to your organization in terms of when the last gift they gave was, but it's been a little bit. We often find that those donors don't realize it's been quite so long. They think they're an active donor and don't realize that it's been 18 months since they last wrote you a check. That can also include, though, the wonderful world of donor acquisition. So reaching out to prospective donors that have never heard of you and you want to introduce yourself and propose that they become a donor to your group.
Great. Good. I just want to set that baseline. We're talking about the whole universe here, both, and there'll be different parts of this will be relevant to different aspects of your file or the universe of prospective donors. Maybe people on your list who are like, you have an email for them, but they're not a donor. They've never been a donor. So we're talking about that whole thing and all those means of communication in which you're asking for money or will be asking for money. Maybe you're warming them up. So that's all kind of in the bucket here today. Mark, why should a nonprofit organization, why would a nonprofit organization be interested in doing direct response or going deeper in direct response?
I think you should ask us. I think you should ask us first. Why did I get involved in direct response in the first place as a career? And that would lead into that question because I love direct response advertising as opposed to like general advertising because it's so direct and measurable and accountable. So everything that we do has a clear call to action. You mentioned asking for money. That's the majority of what we do, but we do lead generation and other things too. It's a clear call to action, one call to action typically, not many, and we're always measuring. We're doing database marketing, so we're measuring results so we can show exactly here's what we spent and here's what we got for it. And to me, that's it's scary, but it's also exciting. The other flip side of that scary coin is excitement. And I'm excited about my career because of that, because I can generate results for my clients that move the needle for a mission and not just for the sake of fundraising itself. And that's the answer for why our clients are interested in it, for the same exact reasons that I'm in this career in the first place.
Why? How do you get started? How do you grow, Mark?
It's funny you ask that because I've had, especially during my tenure here at AMFL, I've been gifted with wonderful opportunities to work with certain clients that are either rebooting their direct response, especially their acquisition programs to grow, or they're starting from scratch. And so like over the past 2 or 3 years, I've got a quiver of these case studies now that I can talk about where we started growing in direct response. Direct mail is kind of the linchpin of it because it does provide such a solid, I can build out a direct mail house file renewal program and an acquisition program that feeds into it and have it all be integrated with the other channels. But essentially, you start by having a strategic plan. That's the obvious kind of textbook answer, but it's true. So whether we have a plan or not, we think that way and we work that way. So we always start with the strategic plan, whatever that ends up being. So part of my role is to learn my client's business and then work into like strategic planning with them. So the offers that we create, they're not created,
what's in it? Hold on, Mark. What's in a strategic plan for direct response? Like what are the things that are considered therein?
A lot of it has to do with the mission. What do we do? And then we try to come up with like a core simple offer, like what's the core offer that we do? So an example, if you're a rescue mission and you're feeding people in the local community, $2 provides a meal. That's like the simplest broken down offer and everything.
So that's an offer to
yes.
tell you. So it's not an offer that you're giving the donor something, but you mean by an offer is articulating what their gift does.
Yeah, we don't sell products, so we're not commercial, it's nonprofit, but we sell something that's intangible, and the offer is what wraps that up and lets you know. So when we're trying to, we go through we do it in the macro level. We're discussing the macro level strategic plan, but it also happens every single campaign we do. There's a strategic phase. That's how we launch projects. So that offer construction and going back to what's the mission, what are the strategic goals, and how does that fit into it? So it always rolls up into an overall strategic plan. There's tactics and then there's strategy. They're not the same thing. The tactics is how you get it done, and there's lots of different ways to, lots of different roads to Rome, right? So, but the strategy, often the process is very similar, and it's all founded around mission and the big strategic goals. So we can't create that for our clients. They have to tell us. So we have to ask them and kind of pull that out of them.
Okay. Well, we're going to come back to a lot of that. You're very high level on that.
I know.
You gotta get down to concrete stuff. You start with a strategic plan. I think it's the key takeaway I take from that, and then which means articulating a very specific goal of what it is you want to accomplish. I think it's not unusual, Mark, for instance, for us to sit down or it's just kind of get going. Let's see what happens without any particular goal. And maybe that you do that a little bit, but ultimately you need to have a goal. Like we want maybe what would some goals be? Like I want to acquire X number of donors, probably, right? Or maybe
we have one client where 95% of their operating cost is covered by individual subscriptions, where their typical sector is built on ad revenue, and instead they're independent, so they're able to exist through subscriptions. So our goal there would be to build out the donor file so that they could have as much in donor income as they have in subscriptions and be twice as large. So that's a big strategic.
That's a big strategic goal.
Yeah, but the strategic marketing plan's a little bit more focused on we're going to ask questions like, well, what's your position in the marketplace and how are you different than your competition?
But that's how you get to the goal. Like you have to have, in other words, you got to work backwards from a particular a goal. Yeah, I think that's very important. I don't want to leave this.
There's something funny that I like. It's a phrase. I forget where it comes from, but Eric Strike uses it a lot. The big, hairy, audacious goal, BHAG. And it's just so memorable, and I love the term. But the idea is like, what's the big, hairy, audacious goal that it's like you're almost afraid to say in the room, other people hear, because they'll think, wow, that's audacious. Do you really
not your direct response program necessarily by itself will get you to that BHAG.
But it rolls up into that, and it needs to fit in. Yeah.
So it's funny because what you're hitting, it's like none of this stuff sort of happens in a vacuum. I mean, if you don't have a vision for your nonprofit and where you're going, you haven't articulated that BHAG, it's really kind of hard to even know if you're having success with your direct response. And we're going to get down to details here. Don't worry if you think this is too philosophical, but like you may need to do that first. That's I think where we're coming from here before we get into the particular techniques and tactics that might be used. Teresa, okay, to get down to some specifics, what kind of, I want to talk about results. Okay, let's just kind of start setting some markers. What kind of results should I expect this is not one of the questions you said to ask you. So
it is not.
What kind of results should I expect with my house file? I'm one of these. I see some organizations here in the chat. I'm the Shrine, National Shrine of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. I'm the St. John Henry Newman Institute in Grand Rapids. I've got donors. I'm presuming you all have donors. I've got donors. If I do a direct response campaign to those donors, just generally speaking, like what do good results look like at a house file level?
Yeah. Well, at a bare minimum, your house file should be generating revenue for you. If that's not the case,
net positive, right? More coming in than you're spending. Yeah, bare minimum.
That is the threshold goal. Above and beyond that, one of the things I really look at is your return on investment. So how much did you spend and how much did you bring in? Right. Depending on how seasoned of a house file program you have and how used to that your donors are, I would expect a return of investment anywhere between 2 to 4, 4 to 10, and also depending on what kind of mailing you're doing. If you're mailing major donors, you're going to be bringing in a whole lot more money than if you're mailing more lower level donors. So it kind of depends. But anywhere in the range of an ROI of 2 to 10 is what I look at.
I know that's a big range, but it does depend on all the things you just said. How seasoned are they? Are they used to being asked to give by direct mail? How many are you doing how many campaigns per year? Right, that sort of thing.
And what are you mailing them? If you're mailing an annual report appeal and it's got like a 16-page beautiful brochure put in the middle, that's going to cost you a lot more than mailing a 2-page letter in a little envelope, which is then going to potentially impact your return on investment. I would say it's probably still worth it to do it, but
Mark, is that about the right range, you think?
I get more specific with it because just my experience working in development shops for nonprofits, and I put on my chief development officer hat on, and I'm thinking in terms of like a bigger kind of corporate nonprofit that has different divisions that operate for these different budget categories. So I think in terms of income centers, major donors is an income center, direct mail house file is an income center, even acquisition could be spun off, legacy giving, foundations, these are all income centers. So I think in terms of the direct response income center, house file in that context doesn't have to be 10-to-1 ROI because the other guys are doing that kind of, if you're the farm team for everything else and you're feeding the donor pyramid, right? Your donors distribute in terms of low donors are the most numerous at the bottom of the pyramid, mid donors in the middle, and the least numerous, but the biggest givers generating the most money are at the tip of the pyramid. So in that context, your house file renewal program is feeding the bottom in the middle and and your farm team, like a baseball farm team, AAA team.
So in that case, if you're operating at that level, you don't need to have that high ROI direct.
Well, I want I still want it to be an income center.
Sure.
So what's the minimum of what that needs to be to operate well? And and in the context of like higher postage rates and higher logistic printing rates and everything, this gets harder and harder to do. But I'd like to get $3 for every dollar I spend in that wider context. But I have programs that do better than that, some that do worse for different reasons.
Yeah, good.
I think Mark's hitting on one of the key goals, at least for me in direct response, is keeping donors engaged in your mission. Always keeping them communicated with, they know what's going on, they're plugged in, and then as more they feel engaged, the more they're likely to donate to you.
The other thing that came out of what Mark just said, I think it hits on the earlier, direct response is not in a vacuum, and it should not be evaluated necessarily in a vacuum. It is part of a high functioning development program, because you can't look at major gifts. Ultimately, you can if you have no direct response program. I guess you can see how your major gifts are doing, but you're going to find that a good direct response program helps your major gifts perform better, right? It helps your legacy giving perform better. To your point, Mark, we just recently, to give an anecdote, I'll do this now. Direct response. What's one of the good things that can happen? Why should you do this? Just had a client to get $1 million estate gift from a donor who started giving as a direct response donor. She was acquired through direct mail, gave like $100, never gave more than $500, but gave a few gifts, all in direct mail. No one had ever visited with this person, had a $46 million estate when she died, less than $1 million this organization. That just happened.
Bless her heart. Bless her.
Just happened 2 days ago.
Yeah.
That's how you get, that takes all the ROI numbers that we're talking about and blows them out of the water. That's what can happen. Now that won't get counted as a direct response gift by this organization. It won't be in the numbers that they use if you're trying to look at it in a vacuum, like, because that didn't come in through direct mail. You know, that's
Jeremy, this brings up a really good point. So the idea of vacuum or blinders. So when you hyper focus and silo things, then you don't have the interconnected picture. So another example of that would be oh gosh, what was I going to think? Okay. So let me take that scenario and manipulate it, and you tell me what you think is the right or wrong thing to do. So we get that donor that comes in. Let's say they come in $100, but maybe they give $1,000, and then a major donor in this particular organization is $5,000 or more. So they're kind of on the radar, but not really. They're giving a direct mail regularly. That's how they came in. But then they upgrade, and boom, they're a major donor. Now they're taken out of direct mail. Do you think that's the right thing to do or a mistake?
Yeah, well, I know what I think, Mark. I'll be here to you and Teresa saying, I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake most of the time. I'm not saying there aren't occasions where it might not be the right thing to do, but I think far more people err on taking their major donors out of their direct response program than leave them in too much. What do you think?
Yeah, and let me give you the nightmare scenario of that. Yeah. They get upgraded and taken out of direct mail, and then they languish and no one's cultivating them. They're not going through a robust cultivation major.
It happens all the time, and that happens all the time. All the time. People take, this is $1,000 donor or $5,000 in this case.
The worst thing you can do is nothing.
Yeah, then they don't have the major.
You're not engaging with them anymore. It's like they're like, "What happened? I dropped off the face of the earth. So I guess I'm not important to you anymore." You know,
it's very rare that people get mad. They're still getting direct mail. If somebody tells you to take them off their direct mail, you do that. You know, but
Well, and not all direct mail is equal, Jeremy.
Right.
We do high-end kits. So, I mean, I am trying to save expense in this environment. I'm trying to like lower in acquisition, especially the margins are tight. I'm trying to lower the cost per piece for most of the volume, but I have high-end packages like a poly bag with a book in it that we just mailed. And that's expensive, but I only do it for certain. So for some places, I'm looking to spend more. So in our house file, we have like segmentation and kits for the high-end people, so they get something different, and that's deliberate. There's a strategy behind that, and it's a longitudinal strategy.
We'll get to that, because you're getting into sophisticated tactics. I think it's important. I think our point is here, like, you can't necessarily evaluate these things in a vacuum. Everything is interconnected. I'm going to come back to you, Teresa, now. Same question. And I don't know that now I'm going in any order, by the way, in case you're wondering out there, like, what's the order of these questions? I don't know. I've had half a tequila at noon. So
you're ahead of me, Jeremy.
Teresa, Teresa, acquisition. So now house file, we just said, I think we gave some nice baseline numbers for people to kind of know. It's hard. Acquisition is an investment, right? Like, you lose money typically. Talk about like what kind of numbers should people sort of expect in an acquisition program, and why would you do it given the numbers you're probably going to tell us right now?
Yep. I mean, you're right. It's a scary investment for a lot of organizations. The amount of money you have to put into mail in order to acquire new donors is risky and scary, especially if most acquisitions don't make you money right off the bat. But to your question, numbers I look for, it depends across the board. For clients that are more seasoned in donor acquisition, and so they kind of have a good message built up, they kind of know what they're doing. I like in this environment to see a response rate around 0.5%. That's kind of a good baseline.
There's a little reality check for everybody too. Like, that's the good one. I mean, we see higher than that. We see don't get too upset, but that's a baseline. That's a benchmark.
But for organizations that are just starting out, it takes time to get there. So you might be starting at 0.2% or 0.3%, and you have to kind of test and work and refine that in order to grow the program.
This is mail response rates you're talking about now, by the way, not digital.
Exactly. But the reason you got to do it is because, as we all know, donors lapse. So every year, donors who gave to you last year, some aren't going to give to you this year, and you might not be able to win them back by what you do. So you're left with two options: your donor file shrinks, or you acquire new donors to replace the ones you lost. So it's kind of a both and scenario that you have to be working with.
We'll get to the question here in a little bit, like, well, aren't there better ways to go to acquire donors? That's a question I'm going to ask Mark here in a second. But let me ask you, Teresa, but just to elaborate what you just said, even if you have a 0.5% response rate, I'll use a real example that we just did this analysis together, Teresa. Well, you did it. I looked at it. 0.6. This client did a campaign, and let's, for the ease of, I won't get into all the details, 0.6% was the response rate, and brought in 214 new donors. It's not a huge client, not a huge campaign, but you can look at new donors. Like, is it the case, Teresa, that your first gift really predicts pretty well how much you'll give over the next 5 years?
It does.
Right. So we can look at, and anybody can do this. Okay, look at the people who gave a first gift of $1 to $49, $50 to $99, $100 to $499, $500, however you want to break it down. Those benchmarks are out there. We can provide them for you if you want them from Anvil. And then do the math. And those 214 donors had an expected, do you remember what the expected 5-year?
I think it was $250,000.
It was a little over $250,000, which is about 6 to 1, I would say, on what this client spent on the mailing. So that's why you do it. You lose money up front, you gain it with a high functioning house file program and a major gifts program and a legacy giving program, all that stuff on the other side. Mark, what would you
also, just to add on to that, the key with acquisition donors is not just to get them into the door, but to cultivate them into making a second gift, because you are going to lose money bringing them in most likely. But the goal is you engage with them, build that relationship, and encourage continued giving. And ideally, they'll pay for that initial investment with their giving by the end of the year.
Yeah, by the end of the year. Mark, you can add to that as you want, but then tell me too why, if it's so if the results are like that, like surely there are better ways to acquire new donors on a mass scale.
Well, actually, I have a warning for other consultants before I go any further. Warning is beware of your successes, because they'll set the bar very high and set expectations very high. So I have 3 clients that I rebooted or started new acquisition programs in the mail in the past couple of years. And one client did 5 million pieces in the first year at scale as we were ramping it up, and they broke even, which is unheard of. I mean, this is like watershed stuff. It's not the normal, the other client made money, 70, 80 grand, and brought on 1,500 donors. Their active file was only 2,000. Another client, there's internal acquisitions, so they were subscribers, so they already had a relationship, so the potential was high, and we knew that. That's why we started with them, and we made 400,000 net income and brought on 10,000 subscribers to become donors. When you have those kind of initial numbers, it's like the expectations are sky high, and it's like, wait a second, this is great, but this is not normative. The normative is what Therese is telling you, 0.5% response, so it depends on the list and the program and all that. And really what you need to be looking for is a mix of things so you don't get too out of kilter. So, and depending on the strategic goals and the strategic plan, but generally speaking, I want quality and I want quantity. I want both. So I kind of cater my programs so we have different, like we have a high dollar acquisitions where we're trying to get $1,000 donors in the door. And we do, maybe one of those a year. That's that polybag I mentioned to you that we're testing it. It's doing really well. That actually elevated our response rate from 0.5% to 1%, as an example.
Mark, just to linger on that, is generally the rule of thumb is the more expensive your package, the higher average gift you will get back, right?
Depending on your strategy.
Depending on the list. But generally,
the list is 40% of the results. You got to have good data. Yeah. We're using modeling. We're using response lists.
Isn't the case? But hold on. But you're in the weeds, man. Isn't it the case generally? That people respond? There's some weird response to the quality of the package that they receive. That they will.
But there's always the issue of capacity, and then there's always the issue of propensity. So are they good targets? Do they care about this mission? Are they interested in it? Do they have a history of giving to it? Those things matter. So, but yes, generally speaking, it's true. But I mean, in terms of back to that income center concept, put on my chief development officer hat. We have budgets. We have different budgets for these different departments. We spend money, we raise money. How efficient are they compared to each other? How important are they in terms of the marketing mix and the sustainability of the donor file? What's driving the metrics as well as the money? And so in the context of like a mail acquisition program, I want to try to get my money back. If we make an investment and we're in the hole, a certain amount, I want to make that money back within 12 months. And the reason I want to do that is budget calendar years. I don't want to be carrying the burden of previous years into 1 year into the next. That's the basic concept. So as long as we maintain that strategy, we're good. So in that context, there's a good rule of thumb that's really helpful. And that's to look at the net cost per donor. So how much in the hole am I per donor that I just acquired? And then what's their average gift? And if they're about at parity, I could probably get another $50 gift from those people in the next year on average. See how that works? So in 12 months, I'm going to be able to recoup that.
In other words, so you're saying ideally, the cost to acquire a donor is equal to the average gift.
If I want to make up that money in a year, that's a good rule of thumb. That's my shorthand. If I look at it, I could look at a report and tell you, they're going to make up. That doesn't always work,
obviously.
This assumes they have a good, robust renewal program, where they're mailing every month and all those things being equal. I can look at a report and tell you, you're going to break even in 12 months, or you're going to break even in 6 months, or whatever. And we do reporting to actually measure. And that's another thing too, is like the upfront results. So we're talking upfront results, 0.5% response. That's the beginning. 12 months out of the road, did I break even? That's kind of mid-range. But the real issue was long range, 5 years, 6 years. When we did that client survey back in 2021, I was all over that thing, because you had that one section that showed actual data. You were just talking about it. And I can use that. Now you got to be careful how you use these things, because you got to know the data set you're working from. And is my client a good fit for those
numbers,
those participants in that survey? And if they are, and does my client have a good MGO major gift officer cultivation program? If they do, they're competing well against the others in the sector, then I could use these numbers to project, and I do for some of my clients. So we do a big mailing cohort. We bring in 8,000 donors in one campaign, and I'm showing 15 million in 6-year value, and it's based on that actual report. And what I can tell you is, if you give 100, the whole premise is your initial lifetime gift is a major indicator of your long-term value. So we use actual averages from actual data. Yeah, and so if you give $100, that jumps you up. But if you give $1,000 or more, now you're in a whole other category.
All right, let's bring it back down from Mark's like huge campaigns to something. I think a lot of the people probably listening in here are not doing millions of units of direct response, nor have they plans to do millions of units of direct response, although we can learn from those examples. Teresa, talk about like the messaging that an organization should use in direct response, maybe direct mail in particular. Is it different? I mean, do you talk to a donor or prospective donor differently than you talk to anybody else? Like, how does that, what's a message, good messaging look like in direct mail?
Yeah, I think that's such a fine line and something a lot of organizations struggle with. I think the key for most direct mail, and I'll say most direct mail, is that you want to be writing in a conversational tone, which for most organizations is about a 5th or 6th grade level. But very conversational, short sentences, short paragraphs, and repeat, because most people, there's been so many studies done, most people are skimming your letter, reading what you bolded or highlighted. They'll jump to the end and read the PS. So you want to continue to repeat that message over and over again, but make it really clear what you're asking donors to do. I want you to give me $2 so I can feed a family.
You wouldn't actually say me, that's just a quick example.
Correct.
That's not good technique.
No.
But yeah, your point's well taken.
When I started in direct mail, one of the best pieces of advice I got from someone who does a lot of direct mail writing was, he's told me, thinking about direct mail and trying to formulate what that message is, think about if you were going to be really, really blunt and writing a letter, you would write, "Dear Teresa, will you give me X dollars so that I can do this, or so that this organization can do this?" And that's your message. And you craft the letter around that, and you tell stories that support that. But it all boils down to your donation of $5 does this.
Yep.
That's the message.
You know that makes me think of, Teresa. We're in this group called the Direct Response Group within the agency, and Teresa and I in the group just recently had a conversation. We meet every week. We just recently had a conversation about AI and ChatGPT and how AI applies to fundraising, particularly creative and messaging. And I mean, you could literally write a fundraising letter through AI. So we talked about the pros and cons of it, the limitations, and we're intrigued by it more as a tool to help us in setting up writing and doing research and doing strategy briefs than in doing the writing itself. Teresa, didn't you have a good example of a client that played around with that, and what was their response to the copy as opposed to like the human element?
Yeah, this is such a rabbit hole. I had a client that redrafted their gift acknowledgement letters using ChatGPT, and us and our writing team kind of took another stab at it. And end result, the client much preferred what our writing team had done, which I think just because they added that human personal element that ChatGPT can't quite pull in yet. And
what was the phrase they used? Didn't they call it the ChatGPT copy? What did they call it? Hollow?
Yeah, I think so. But I think that's really the goal of direct response writing, is to be personable, relational, engaging, as if I'm sitting down to coffee with you and I just want to tell you this great story and how you can get involved.
That was a powerful reminder of like what's the power of human storytelling, and it's like there's an element to that you can't, the soul of it, that makes it real and touching.
Mark, I just remembered you never answered my question.
That's a little trick. Oh man,
direct mail is expensive. Should we?
Is it? Is it really?
We reduced our spending.
Okay.
Did we get the slot? Hey, direct mail is really expensive. Yeah. I'll get it back in a year. Maybe it's 2 years. Should I just do email? Email's cheap. Digital's cheap. Shouldn't I just do that? Like, why in this day and age? It's 2023. Why would we be sending anything over the mail? What's your answer?
Gosh, I don't know. We just sent out like a member card package to a group of donors that are probably all new within the past 2 years. Again, building out a direct response file from scratch. and they just responded almost 9.5% response and like a $70 average gift. Do emails do that? I don't think so. So I mean, there's the potential there is there's a lot more elasticity in terms of the potential. It's funny. I've heard it described. I was listening to a webinar from a former colleague who's a creative guy, and he was talking about how direct mail is like the cold medium compared to like TV or whatever, and online and social. And I mean, yeah, maybe colder in terms of not as interactive or whatever, but in another sense, it's very warm. You know, when's the last time you got a heartfelt letter from somebody that's an art form that's almost lost in our society, but the human value of it has not gone away. It's just we've forgotten it, you know. And in one sense, we're keeping an art form alive, and we're keeping, you know what I mean? And
but just get right down to the numbers, though. In terms of the numbers, though. Like direct mail,
well, that's what I meant by the 9. That's why I led with the 9% response, $70 gift, because email doesn't do that. I mean, the response rates in email are much lower. It's much cheaper, but it's also not as engaging and from a direct response standpoint. And you know, so I see the power of the two together. I could use the example from the catalog business. So you know, catalogs, they mail them out. What's more expensive than a catalog? I can't. You know, wow. Imagine how expensive they are today. And guess what? They still mail catalogs. Why? You know, and the answer to your question is buried in that reality. And the reason is because when they stopped mailing catalogs and they were just relying on their online store or maybe some bricks and mortar or whatever, people stopped buying because the catalog was actually, you know, and in direct response, you gotta measure what's measurable, but also you got to look at what's invisible from a code, from a direct data standpoint. There are some aspects to it that's like, well, this is supporting, you know, what you're doing. And so they'd have the catalog and they would use that to do their shopping. Then they order online. And who's to say, you know, so it's the goose egg kind of thing. It's the attribution question. What gets credit for this? What's the hard credit? What's the soft credit? So we need to dig into that more and be more thoughtful about it, not just, you know.
Talk about how you integrate digital techniques with mail and direct response. Let's say for a house file mailing, Mark, and don't take just the million ones. Think of a smaller. How would a smaller organization, a school, let's say, integrate their end of year direct mail with digital techniques?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's like one of the best things we can do for our clients, big or small, is to, like, when we're doing our copywriting and we're creating the brief. As a part of that brief, we're asking we're asking for copy, not just for the appeal, but for social media. And we're asking for copy for an email. So an email typically is going to be like the direct mail piece, but it's good. It's this, you know, fundraising and the principles are the same of persuasion, and it's clear call to action, you know, answer the questions. What's the problem? How is your organization solving it? What's it going to cost? How is my gift going to make a difference? And why is it urgent? Why today? Those are the questions we create briefs out of. If we answer those questions well, we're going to have a good offer. And that's true about an email or direct mail piece. So the email is, you can, in terms of how it's deployed, it's basically a shorter version with lots of links, and it drives you to a landing page. And you want visual elements that key off of what's in the mail, so you want it to be integrated. So the same picture of the same girl who's starving, or what have you. And the timing of it's going to be in support. So you might lead with the email, you might chase with the email, you might do both. There's cool things you can do in digital that you can't do in the mail, so you take advantage of that. You know, Giving Tuesday, you know, regardless of what you think about it, it's had its successes, and that's been built around all timing and seasonal. A lot of giving happens in the last, you know, few days of the year, the last month of the year. You know, huge percentage of giving. So want to take advantage of that in the email, and you know, use your December 31st midnight deadline and reminders and all that. So, and there's the cadence of it. You have opportunities to engage a lot more than in the mail because of the cost and because of expectations. You know, if you're careful about it and you send meaningful material, you know, e-news updates, and you mix it up, appeals versus cultivation and everything, you'll be able to interact with them at just that much more engagement. So it's a both end thing, not an either or. And we're not a digital only fundraising agency, so obviously we're gonna want to do both, because that's, you know, as our philosophy, it's integrated marketing is the ticket.
Teresa, it's not a secret that people are worried about the economy. People are always worried about the economy. It's always funny to me. People say, people are worried about the economy today. I've been alive for 50 years. I don't remember a time people weren't worried about the economy. But anyway, That's true. It's a little bit, there's some headwinds right now. There really are, in particular in the direct mail, in the nonprofit sector. If you've been feeling that, you're on this call or you're listening to this later, you're not alone. You probably saw that nonprofit giving was down last year for only the fourth time in the last 40 years. It was down by 3.4%, and inflation adjusted dollars was down by more than 10%. So tough environment. We don't know, we never know what's coming. But people say, Teresa, there's a recession coming, or there might be a recession coming. Is that what does that mean? I should cut back? I should pull back on my direct response expenditures?
Expenditures, maybe. Your direct mail program, I would say no. We saw that a lot during COVID when, again, people were really scared about the economy and their budgets. But the organizations that we work with who stayed in the mail are doing better now than those that didn't. And it's just because they were keeping their donors engaged. And that's the thought I have going into the next year or two, is even if people have less money to give, we still want to give them the opportunity to stay engaged. If the $30 donor can only give you $20 right now, we'll still take the $20. But now is a great time to start thinking smarter about how you're doing your direct mail, really honing in on your segmentation strategies, who's getting all these direct mail pieces, when are you sending them, what kind of mail are you sending them, are there ways you can make tweaks so you're still getting your mail out, but it might look a little different to save you a little bit of money. There's a whole lot you can do around that.
There's something we do with clients. More sophisticated organizations are always going to do this, but if you're, it may be new to you if you're on this call, and that you can do some pretty cheap data modeling, right? That will kind of tell you pretty effectively, as far as I can tell, who not to mail, right, yep. Teresa? Yeah, can you talk about how that works?
Yeah, so I have done some work with an outside agency that helps us with that. They take a look at who you're mailing, who's responding, who's not responding, and use that to identify for a particular mailing list who's least likely to respond to that. We use that a lot in acquisition, because if you're like Mark and renting 5 million names, that's a big expense. Even if you're a smaller organization renting and mailing 50,000 names, that's still expensive.
Yeah.
I've worked with clients to take those 50,000 names, cut off the bottom 10% that the AI model tells us they're probably not going to respond to your mailing anyway. You just don't mail them. We did that with one client that Jeremy and I worked together on recently, cut off the bottom 15% of names from their acquisition mail file, and ended up saving them $30,000 right out the gate.
Right. You probably paid $1,000, if that, to do the modeling. So the net gain was like 29 grand or something. And you can imagine that at whatever scale you might be operating at. So there's something, that's one thing. I just like your point of like, get smarter, but don't stop.
Don't pull the plug.
Don't pull the plug. One of our guests here just noted that, yeah, during COVID, but it's a great example, by the way, Ryan, because we had so many clients like, oh, we're not going to gas, we're going to give it, and they were out for months, and where others didn't. Maybe more seasoned organizations in some cases, or people with just a little bit, I don't know, they're at different intuitions. And of course, it turned out that 2020 was a banner year for nonprofits. Now, unless you were in arts and culture, that was a bad year because you depend on event revenue, education, similar. But a lot of others, it was a banner year. And 2021 was a banner year, which is why the 2022 downturn needs to be seen in that context. It would have been a huge uptick in giving in 2020 and 2021. But you didn't get an advantage of that if you weren't still reaching out and communicating and asking your donors, obviously in an appropriate way. I think the recession, if there is a recession coming, I think it's a similar story. Get smarter. You don't have to mail to everybody. Be smart with your segmentation. We can go deeper into that if anybody wants. I know that's maybe we'll get to that if I get a chance here, like what that means. That's a good reminder.
Let's just, for argument's sake, assume we're in a recession. Recessions have a beginning and then they have an end. You know, they don't last forever. the longer they go on, the worse they are. Remember the recession from back in 2008? It was a double length recession. It was a 4-year recession instead of a 2-year. The thing to know is that the pain increases with the duration. So with every month that we're in a recession, we're going to feel the pain more. We talked about this before the call started. You know, in the nonprofit world, you don't really see it showing up and giving its delayed reaction. It's like maybe 6 months after the start. So there's that factor too. But eventually there's going to be an end to this recession. And who is going to be positioned well in the marketplace in terms of, because when you're mailing, you're gaining business intelligence. You're getting, you know, the whole point of, I like to use the metaphor of a train with cars attached to it. It's really heavy, and that's acquisition in the mail particularly. And you're trying to find the right lists and modeling and response lists, and you're trying to find the right offers. I tend to use like good house file packages that do high % response. I try to convert them into acquisition packages. That's a common technique I use for obvious reasons. And keep a donor the way you get them. Let's make sure that we're getting the right people that are going to stick. But once you get that train going, that you got to keep it going. And if you stop, it's going to slow down. And guess what? Now you got to start over again. That's what that whole reboot scenario is about. You let acquisition sit for 2 years on pause, and now we got to start over again. Luckily, we hit the ground running. We had a big win. We knocked it out of the park first try. But that's not going to happen all the time. And that's a small organization with a 2,000 donor active files. So we brought on 1,500 donors in the first 6 months. You know, and they're like, "Oh, stop acquisition. We can't handle the $1,000 donors. We don't have enough people to handle this." And I'm like, "You really want to stop?" You know, I should have pushed back harder on that.
Well, that's okay. It's about direct response. It's hard for people to take the big.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a small organization. We're in a spring, fall cadence. There's not a lot. We're not mailing every single month in acquisition. So those campaigns matter, and you skip one, that's a, you know, there's an effect, what's the word? Yeah, it's going to have effect for years to come. Yeah, the fact that you skip that.
Yeah, my point was going to be that, by the way, just to this very point, like, if you have donors who have capacity and have expressed their affinity for you at a certain level and higher, it's $1,000 gift or higher, and you don't have enough major gifts officers to reach out to those donors and try to build relationships with them, you're actually not stewarding your organization very well, because if you were to hire a major gifts officer to do that, you would bring in more money for your organization than it costs you for that MGO. I know that's a different talk. That's not direct response. But that's a talk I have to have. And I still have a lot of clients who have great success and don't keep up. And it doesn't feel right to them to go hire even more major gift officers. But
if you're a good direct response person, like Teresa, you don't have your blinders on. You're seeing the big picture, and you're trying to work for the whole thing, for the whole, the good of the whole. Yeah. And the whole is greater than the sum of the parts kind of thing.
Hey, Teresa. Okay, let's let's answer Chris Weir's question, since it just came in on the chat. Chris Weir, I'm going to ask you, since it looks like you're active, how many? It all depends on how many donors would you be looking to acquire, Chris?
And I would also ask, what kind of industry are you in?
Chris I think it's going to be an education industry question. But tell me how many. You tell us how many donors you want to acquire, we'll tell you the cost. But we can ballpark the cost. Before we get there, yeah, I know. Let's say
I got asked that same question. A client in Chicago, we were doing a strategic plan for them. I was part of that team, and now we're talking direct response and major donors and foundations. And he asked that question of what's it going to cost, and you know, I give him my honest answer in terms of what again, chief development officer hat, put that hat on, and what's going to take to get this train rolling, and what's going to give me the knowledge base that I need in terms of number of lists, size of, because I know how it adds up. You know, there's a certain size of a list that you want, 2,500 names, 5,000 names, whatever, to get a read on that list. Anything smaller, and you're not going to really know. You know, there is the issue of math and statistical relevance here. So we have to have enough to get the read. And so knowing that, and you know, you're testing 10 lists, maybe one or two of them will work, you know, that kind of math. So I like to use the number, if we're going to do a spring and a fall, two campaigns a year, I'd like to say like total direct spend on that 100,000, 150,000, something along those lines. to really get started. That's just the flat number I use just to see if they get sticker shock or not.
Okay,
that gives me a good idea.
Again,
of like,
Mark,
okay.
you're operating from a different world. I think you're operating from a pretty big scale or potentially big scale world. But that's to how many donors, if you spend 100 to 150 grand, how many donors do you think would be acquired? A ballpark.
Well, again, use the 0.5% response. So 1% would be, well, let's say we're mailing like 100. Okay, we could lower the number. Let's say lower the number to 100,000 spend, and let's say you're mailing 150,000 pieces for that. So 1% response would be 1,500. So half that, 750 donors. Yeah. So that's there.
Although, for a new school, I would push back and go lower to set more realistic expectations, unless you're really niche in the community and you've got a lot of local support already. It's a hard sell to acquire new donors for new schools.
It is
more than
but you got to do it.
2%.
That's why Chris was asking. So if we say he was going to mail 50,000 units, Chris, if you did, that's 0.5 and 0.5% was our goal. You get 250 donors that way. 50,000 units. Teresa, how much are we going to spend direct cost for 50,000 units?
$50,000 probably.
Yeah, and is that counting any? Is that and then emails and stuff that goes with it?
Yep.
Okay.
Probably close to 50.
I've got one client here locally, and they're actually a pro bono client. So I just spend a little bit of my time and I work for them for free because I was told I was allowed to do that. So I do that. And it's it's an organizational. Yeah, they work in the prisons, and they do the name of the ministry is Jumpstart. So it's a faith-based ministry. They work in the prisons, and then they do transitions outside of the prisons. And then we have like 300-400 donors, and it's a regional thing, but they've actually impacted the recidivism rates in the state of South Carolina. That's how effective these guys are. And they just attended Stand Together, so they're a good fit for that. But my goal is to work with them because there's ways to build your database up to the point where, now we're ready to kind of ante up and get into this bigger game. So I would start like there and kind of roll it back a little bit and say, okay, what are the pieces we need to get in place to be ready to do some direct mail acquisition? And obviously digital's cheaper. Your special events and getting around into your community. If you're a regional base, it's all about your community relationships. So I'm trying to introduce this guy to people that I know, that are doing work in the prisons. I have a friend who's a federal prosecutor. He's an elder in my church, and he runs the prison ministry at my church. And I'm going to get them together for lunch. That's an example of because they need a speakers program and getting into the churches. That's because they're faith-based. So that's the way I would try to grow them initially.
Teresa, we get asked this a lot too, oftentimes. We already doing 2 appeals a year to our house file. I can't burn these people out. How much would be too often for me to mail or how many campaigns? Let's put it that way. I keep saying mail because that's kind of anchor these things. Again, we're talking about integrated direct response. How many is too much, or how would I know?
Yep. There's 2 things I look for when you're thinking about too much. It's when you stop making money on your appeals and when your donors start to tell you it's too much.
But now when you say when your donors start to tell you, that's got to be more than like 1 or 2 grumpy people. Right?
It's not the squeaky wheel.
Yeah. Okay.
We could have a whole talk about 1 or 2 grumpy people.
Can't let like 2 grumpy people control our fundraising program. I think that's a key principle.
I would say most of my clients are mailing once a month, and I've yet to hear any of them get a significant uproar from their donor base that it's too much.
Soliciting once a month, Teresa?
Yep.
Okay, that's going to be a bit of a shock to people, I think, listening to this.
So I would say if you're only mailing twice a year, you can build incrementally. So if you're doing twice, go to once a quarter or go to once every other month and kind of build up slowly. So you get used to that, your donors get used to that, and then keep adding on appeals. And if the 7th appeal makes money, try an 8th appeal next year. And if that one makes money, then you can try a 9th.
I gotta tell my anecdote here. This is a true story. That there was a client that had a significant revenue hole, and they had us up to try to figure it out. It was like $1 million or something. And I think only did 1 appeal a year at that time. Maybe it was. I think it was.
Yeah, that's the annual fund.
How many? And it's how much does that bring in? And they had a big file. Those subscribers and donors both. brings in about $1 million. It's like, all right, and you have $1 million revenue hole? That's right. Like, I got a brilliant idea for you. Let's do another appeal. And of course, whatever, it brought it by 800,000 or something. Or sometimes you'll see your appeals get more effective. All of them, Now that doesn't happen maybe the 15th appeal, but it might happen the third appeal you add or the fourth appeal. So yeah, most people are not mailing, they're not enough campaigns, right? That's usually the problem.
And I would say too,
oh, go ahead.
One of the core principles of marketing is the person most likely to buy from you is the person who just bought from you. And you can apply that into fundraising too. The person most likely to donate is the one who just did. So if I give to you in January and you don't ask me again till July or August, I've forgotten already. If I give in January, ask me again. I remember, I like you guys.
Mark, yeah, and I flip the script too. It's like, do you have a reason? Do you have something to talk about? Do you have a need? Do you have and that in and of itself generates the mailing or the communication. It's like, hey, these are people that we're in a relationship with. There's a ministry. I use the term ministry as a Christian. I think in terms of giving as an act of faith, oftentimes, and we're told to give back. And in that tradition, in that practice, it's like that's a ministry of giving, and like we're actually helping people. It's not transactional, it's relational, it's missional. It's like it's the product is not a thing. It's the fact that they know that they're making a difference in the world, and how that changes, doesn't just change the person's life that's the recipient, it changes your life too. You get something back and you're changed. It's not so if we have a reason to send something, let's do it. And that requires, if you're, I'm gonna use the dating metaphor, if you're in a dating relationship or you're engaged to someone and you don't talk to her or him for a month, something might be wrong. You might not be getting married someday, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. We only have 3 minutes left, so I want to get to the question we have here. And Mark, I'll give this to you from Samantha Donahue. I think your position to answer this well, Mark. How does PR? Samantha, I'm gonna interpret that to mean building your brand, just general brand building efforts.
No, that's how I interpret it.
That, because usually that's different than what we're talking about now, but it's interrelated, right? Like, how does that lift the floor of your direct response results? Like, how does that interact with what we do with direct response?
To give you an idea of how important I think this is in a sense, I like to try to pick my clients if I can. Whenever I'm given the opportunity, I pick my clients and I pick them based on the answer to this question. In other words, how strong is their brand? If they have a strong brand, and I think of it in terms of mission too, like in terms of our mission, what's our mission? Strengthening civil society. We have clients that are doing that on point, day in and day out, and they're making a huge difference. And I learn about who they are, and I'm like, oh, I would love to have them as a client, or I'm trying to go after them. Or here, they're a new client. Can I be on this account, please? I've begged to be on certain accounts. And practically speaking, it's the brand question. Yeah, I know I have an opportunity here to really help them move the needle. But also, it's like there's the missional part of this, because usually brand is as good as it is because of how effective this organization, especially in the nonprofit world, are at their mission. You really can't separate the two, and so it is important. And it's like, I like to use the metaphor sea level, the higher the sea level, it raises all ships. It makes everything easier, having the PR of the brand. So obviously we have another client, though. This is one in Chicago I was talking about earlier. They had a lot of media placements, a lot of organic free media that was worth millions of dollars. And they got, this is a regional organization working in impoverished communities in Chicago, and they were getting donors nationally, and they were overwhelmed by that. In a 1-2 year period, they got like 20,000 donors, and so they have the potential to be much larger than they are, and to have an impact not just on Chicago but on the whole country.
The answer is it really helps. It's something we often talk to our clients about. Like, look, these things go together. Now, you won't just raise money just by having a good, typically, some Mark's example aside, just by having a good brand, certainly you won't sustainably do that. These have to go together, but boy, it does help. And if you can do things to boost your brand and through PR and other efforts, that's really helpful. All right. Yes. Timing your press releases with your fundraising solicitation calendar.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes, great. That's great. Bring these two parts of your organization together. Absolutely. That's very smart. Getting your people out as talking heads out there on podcasts, radio, TV, also very helpful. We can speak to that from experience. All right, I'm Swiss. I'm a Nazi about time. It's an hour. I'm going to let you go. Just a couple of things. We have a masterclass coming up August 17th on major gifts. If you're interested in that, go to anfield.com/events. Same thing. We have a conference coming up on November 7th and 8th in Scottsdale called Rise of the Nuns, How Declining Religious Affiliation is a Changing Civil Society. We would love to see you there. It'll be a lot of fun. We have great speakers, and you get to meet us. And lastly, if you have any questions we didn't get to today, feel free to follow up directly with Mark or Teresa or me. It's just mdiggs@anfield.com, tbeagle@anfield.com, jbeard@anfield.com. Happy to answer any questions you have and communicate with you like that. And so please do follow up. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you, Mark and Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you.